a hero to me, just blew it out of the water with things that I was experiencing in life that I'll get to shortly, was George Lucas. And combined with the messaging that he was bringing from Joseph Campbell. And what he did was basically he was going samurai monks in space, right? And the idea was that there was this deeper connection and understanding that we're all maybe more connected. We're all maybe more connected to all things that are alive. And this hit a time when we had maybe in many ways a spiritual deficit, particularly in the West, particularly in the United States. Religious numbers were falling. New Agey stuff was kind of turning a lot of people off. And people just felt like there's something more, but they weren't finding any brands that were really identifying where their heart was to the world. And I thought Lucas really knocked it out of the park. You know, as a kid, when that came out, it changed my life. It made me new things I wanted to do, but it also made me say, my God, you know, what Bible classes weren't doing, what this philosophy or that philosophy wasn't doing, a movie could actually do. And it really made me believe in the possibilities of entertainment for change. And it was remarkable.
Let's get closer to what's really affecting people. And when I looked at that, what was affecting me was looking at the environment, how many species were going extinct a year, how many habitats were being destroyed. And as a fly fisherman, one of the great things about the success that I've had that I'm really grateful for is I was able to fly all over the world fly fishing. And there's nowhere, I can tell you, and I've been, you know, closer to the North Pole, you know, up in Alaska and out into the various, you know, remote areas like Bora Bora or the Great Barrier Reef or, you know, aspects of the Caribbean. And it's all not what it was. You know, this is a pretty impacted world. And I didn't see those issues really being dealt with. They're certainly not talked on the news except in a bullshit way. And so I'm like, how do I reinterpret this into a modern mythology? Because what I came to believe is that it was like the power of myth, right? If anyone who's ever watched the Joseph Campbell series. And I was such a fan of Star Wars that I was just trying to digest anything I could find of George Lucas, any biographies, any material. And then my dad sent me, when he was still alive, The Power of Myth. When I was in college and I started watching that video series, the interview with Bill Moyers with Joseph Campbell at Lucas's library up at the ranch, which is about 20 miles north of here, you know, that interview series completely blew my mind because I loved Star Wars, you know, the first 3 movies on such a deep level. Like I was just so appreciative of it and inspired by it. And my dad, one of the first books that really made me think I could actually get into entertainment was he gave me the Art of Star Wars book back in the 70s. And it was like, oh, you know, the first time, like, look at these drawings, look at this art, you know, making that wonderful film. So I was really excited about it on a relatively superficial level. And then I watched that series. Again, I was in high school. And I was just beginning college. And I was starting to be, oh, my God. He had so many working mechanisms about mythology, about culture, about time, you know, what period of civilization you live in that he was playing with in those movies that ultimately developed those stories and developed those images. And that was so inspiring to me that I was like, where is that spot today? And if I was, just to sum it up, if I was to listen to, if I was to summarize in a soundbite, the deficit that I think Star Wars found for the mid-1970s was it wasn't there was a deficit for sci-fi. There was a deficit for spirituality. And what had happened is the world's churches are failing people at a really inspiring rate, you know, which is, you know, you see just flocks of migrations leaving these big institutional churches, and probably for good damn reason, right? But and so this was happening in a major way in the 70s, and at the same time you had this kind of overly woo-woo-y New Ageism that was emerging and turning off a lot of people that were really smart. Because of the way it's talked about, and then or it's getting like, you know, so far out there, Buddhism, sit under the ear for your rest of your, sit under the tree for 20 years and then you'll get it. You know, that wasn't working for people that lived in New York that are doing financial transactions, you know, or working in advertising. I can't go sit under a tree for 20 years. Sure. So what I think was that he, with that property, hit a spiritual deficit that was taking place at a sort of global level, and you were in this tug of war between, you know, completely flaky, woo-woo-y New Ageism, completely staunch sort of various literal interpretations or orthodox views of ancient religions, or staunch science that says, you know, there's nothing and we're just a lightning bolt to hit a pile tidal pool, 3 billion years ago, and this is just a fire that's never gone out. We call it life. And so there wasn't much of a really intelligent dialogue happening, in my opinion, in the sort of public consciousness. And I think Star Wars really resonated in that way, where people have a very strong connection to nature.
So when we create property, let's look at a later one, Star Wars, which I think had way more depth on a different level. If you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's Hero Myth series, my dad, when he was still alive, he sent that to me, and I was in my second year of college, and all of a sudden, something that was a lighthouse beacon for like, wow, I saw George Lucas could make really cool things fly around, samurai monks in space, so cool. Look at the designs, so cool. Then 10 years later, I'm learning, he totally got me. He tricked me into a world of understanding globalization differently. Like the subtext on Star Wars was enormous.
Right.
At times, heavy-handed, at times very subtle. But I realized at that point that I could enjoy it very superficially as an individual, who just went, samurai monks in space, how cool. To someone going, whoa, there's a message here for better understanding, to Yoda's message of we're all connected. The force is running through us, whatever that message. When that happened, that became almost, when I heard Yoda, that really took the place of any previous religious blanks. It was like, that resonated with a different truth to me, which was really just an old, if you knew where Lucas was coming from, was really, Shaolin sort of way of looking at life, Native American, shamanic, all over the world, the ancient myths, the ancient cultures, particularly indigenous, talked about these things. So it was fascinating. So Lucas became the model for me, where I'd say, okay, the problem is we have a world that's sleepwalking. How do we give it what it wants to eat, but offer it more nutritious value than what it's currently eating? And that was really it. So how do we make a granola-covered, a carob-covered granola bar look like a Snickers bar? But if you eat it, you wind up with better vitamins than had you had the Snickers. That's how I perceived media. And that's what I thought Lucas did. My process always came more out of desperation rather than ego. I think ego had a lot of it. Meaning, I hear ego when I hear to do it better.
I see.
Right? And that part of that was going on, but the idea of like, do Star Wars better, it never really occurred to me. What more occurred to me was myths are made at points in time to best communicate with the audience of that day.
Okay.
Right. So
it's accurate.
So this is why a lot of the ancient myths don't hold up for people as relevant anymore. Right. So really, this is what sort of Joseph Campbell was begging for at the end of his life, was for the artists to reinterpret the myths, get the purpose of why these might originate in the first place, reinterpret them from an audience that needs to hear it now, for whatever reasons, and whatever the relevant elements are now. So it's all different. Star Wars is really a classic mythological hero's journey, right? The hero's journey, really. And so for me, what I saw was Lucas stopped at a certain place, but the audience was still going. And so we're talking about a guy who grew up with television and probably still watches the news at night. Right. Now, I don't know, I'm projecting, but I say that because it was so entrenched in his youth getting old. But his new audience is not watching television. Right. So maybe mom and dad are taking you there. But if you're now an internet child, you're growing up with a different stream of knowledge than the one that was more prepackaged from you from a limited number of networks and press outlets, that may have had your mind share. But today's mind share is in a different place. It's much more scattered. And it's we're still talking about one of the most successful brands of all time. But we've learned a lot since those were created in the 70s. And with what we're learning today, I thought, a couple of things. One, and I proposed this to my partner before we started a video game company, is I said, consider this. Next year in the United States, this is 1992, as I did the math, 60 billion hours of human mind share would be going into video games.
Wow.
So there's a market there. But what's it getting? Right? As I saw it, and as my partner saw it, who had no interest in video games, I was saying, look, this is an opportunity, because what is the message that's really being drilled home in that model that exists that's getting 60 billion hours? At that time, it was largely aggression equals rewards. Right? kind of it.
Yeah.
And we said, well, what really do we need more today, almost than anything? Empathy, maybe? And so how do we maybe adjust the paradigm of video games, where 60 billion hours are going to be spent next year, than in mindshare? How do we adjust that maybe to empathy equals rewards? And that became a paradigm that I was able to convince at least my partner to take the journey, you know, and start a game company. That I came from the film business, so film people were like, "What are you thinking?" Now today they're like, "How visionary!" They're looking back, and everything changed. But I was looking at it like, we have this problem, we have this appetite of humanity. Most of it's under a mass hypnosis, quite frankly, and that's just heading us right for the cliff. And then if we love this world, like really the people and the creatures and everything.